Welcome to Creative Dialogues. Creative Dialogues is focused on the arts, exploring collaboration and upskilling and community building within and across art forms. My name is Tom Hogan, and this episode is Inclusive Arts, Access and Advocacy. I must say, I really am still quite nervous about this episode. It's not terrifying or anything, it's just that I'm confronted directly with an issue I've never really tried to solve before. And it sort of showed the cracks of how I need to spend more time and resources getting through it. This episode is on making the arts accessible, so we tried to make this episode, and all future episodes, more accessible as well. So while I make theatre, most of my work is about and through the medium of sound, whether that be music or podcasts or design or performance lectures and so on. And when it comes to theatre and performance, there's a lot of history and systems in place to make your work more accessible. Be that Auslan interpreters, captioned titles, soft performances, and more. But podcasts are pretty new, and because they're strictly oral, they're inherently harder to access. Providing a detailed transcript seems to be the only real way to open it up to deaf audiences. With the help of Wollongong Council's cultural development team, we've tried to make this accessible, not only for our audiences, but also for our guests. So we brought on board Kylie Clear from Sweeney Interpreting to provide an Auslan interpreter. And as this episode will show, there will be a bit of confusion over exactly what we expected Kylie to interpret, while also making sure all our guests keep their microphones from covering their mouths so our lips can be read as well. So to see the video of this episode, that is also subtitled, visit the show notes or the Creative Dialogues webpage. So first up, let me introduce you to Sophia Golan, award-winning director and writer of documentary and drama films, and she also works at Create New South Wales as the sector investment manager and is also the programmer behind the Screenability strand at the Sydney Film Festival. I also want to read directly from her bio here. She's also one of the longest-serving guest actors on Play School, reaching her 29th year on the show, which makes it very likely she's been in your living room while you were in your pajamas. Great. Next up, here is Matthew Hall, who is the CEO of Arts Access Australia and the new Programming Director of Meeting Place, the National Forum for Arts, Culture and Disability in Australia, which took place earlier this month. We also have Ethan and Christian here, who are on this podcast as representatives of the Strange Ways Ensemble from Maragong Theatre. The Strange Ways Ensemble is Maragong's permanent company of professional actors perceived to have intellectual disability, and Wollongong's only professional theatre ensemble. This year, they premiered and then toured their show Trash Talk before COVID shut down. Ethan, I just watched your the digital teaser that you put up. That was wonderful. That was great. It was like kind of funny and sad at the same time. It was really lovely.
Thank you.
Nice work. That was great.
Thank you.
Are you doing more of them? Because it seems like you're meeting weekly.
Yeah, but I haven't heard anything. I haven't been updated on that just yet.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you everyone for joining on this, and thank you, Kylie, for helping out with this. We've had a whole series of podcasts that have been looking at different art forms, and this is probably the first conversation that we've had that seems to cross over various art forms, and which I think is going to make it exciting, or at least it might be a bit confusing, but also I think I'm really excited about this. I've just been reading up on all of you for the past few days, so there's quite a lot to cover. I'm very excited about all this. So maybe I could just start off and sort of say, with all the other interviews that I've done in this, we've sort of talked about what shutdown means. And I've been thinking about, like, this whole idea of shutdown it's about people sort of being housebound or feeling isolation. And as far as like people with disability go, it's not an entirely new thing. And I was wondering if how has the transition been in the sort of short term for any of you? Like Sophia, as far as working or discussions go, is everything like, how has the transition been from pre-COVID to now as far as all this goes?
I think over at Create New South Wales, we've seen we've been privy to a really sharp shock to industry, so to speak. So it's not only the film industry, but the visual art and theatre. They've all just had this really immediate shutdown of actual venues and where they can actually exhibit their work. And we've had shutdown of productions and the like. I mean, in the last few weeks, I mean, they're all coming back to life. They're all coming back and into production and reopening galleries and venues. So we're seeing people with COVID plans, with safe practice in place, now being able to come back in a limited way. But I think, I think what's been quite amazing is seeing people, and I'm going to use this word, pivot, because it's been such a big word over the last few weeks, of artists just pivoting their practice and getting it online. And I think it's been really great to see people who've been maybe thinking about going online or getting their work in a digital space. They've actually just, rolled up their sleeves, got on with it, and they've used this kind of pandemic conditions to take advantage of that inbuilt audience. Captive audience, if you like.
Yeah, captive audiences who are like all over the place actually can sort of access some of these arts as long as like everything is in place and everyone is like very happy to sort of do it. It's especially with like everyone is, as you're right, pivoting towards new technologies, mostly out of necessity. But as a result of that, there's some really good things that have come out of that. Like I've been able to connect with people and connect with audiences in a way that it's kind of has equalized a lot of the sort of problems that weren't available before. I think.
I mean, the one thing I have noticed is that I've been doing video teleconference calls because, being deaf and relying on lip reading, I've been trying to get people to come to that, trying to get to do FaceTime, and now everybody's all over it. Everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
Finally, is there.
All it took was a global pandemic.
It did indeed.
Yeah. Do all your Zooms have Auslan interpreters? Has that been kind of the norm as well?
We've had video conferencing interpreted for a couple of years now. So, that's been something that's been, it was already well underway. So it was really easy for interpreters to just kind of fall into this space and be, and I think a lot of interpreters, just speaking to them, they've been really happy to be able to interpret from home. They've been able to do more work. It's been better working conditions for many. So, there's been a lot of benefit in having interpreters for Zoom in that manner. But I'm not an interpreter. That's only an anecdotal story that I've heard from people I've worked with.
Yeah. I suppose there's a worry that this is just... There's this hope that this is kind of the situation is temporary, but I guess also at the same point where one of the big concerns is that this online accessibility is maintained much beyond all this. And maybe Matthew, I can turn to you for this. Looking at like Meeting Place that's sort of coming up, which is Meeting Place, as far as I can tell, is essentially about trying to maintain this and how access can be sustained. It seems like that.
Well, certainly that's one aspect of it, Tom. I think it's really very important that we are mindful of the fact that, yes, we've undergone significant changes in how we interact with arts and cultural practice. But I think there is a real worry that when we snap back, or if we sort of eventually get back to some sense of the world as it was before, as to the extent to which cultural institutions or people generally will maintain the sorts of forums or platforms that are well placed for artists and arts workers with disability to access and be involved in. I mean, just coming back to what you were saying before, it's certainly the case that, being isolated or being housebound aren't concepts that are new to many disabled artists. And we would hope that certainly by essentially being forced this year to take our Meeting Place Forum into an entirely digital platform, that we will be able to demonstrate how people can incorporate digital access and inclusiveness into programs, so that it becomes something that is much more generally accepted and the norm as we move forward.
Yeah, that seems to be. Well, could you tell me about Meeting Place generally? Just as I've never had to engage in it, and it's just, and now it's online. It actually makes it more accessible for me as well.
Well, that's certainly the case, and in a sense, it's also a little bit easier to program because you don't have to bring people from all over the world to one place. So,
Yeah.
Meeting Place is a forum that we established in 2012 as a place for anyone interested in the area of art and disability to share and network and to learn, and it's occurred every year since, and it has always been in a physical location over several days, and part of the program has been to educate and inform people about arts practice and artists with disabilities in that actual location. That's as a focal point of part of the program. We were to undertake Meeting Place in Brisbane this year in association with the Undercover Artist Festival, but because of COVID, both that festival is undergoing a bit of a transformation, and we decided to move the entire forum online this year, and as part of that, so we then will hope to show a spotlight or showcase things that are happening with and by artists with disability in the online or digital space. It's not going to be the sole focus of the program, but overall, our theme of the forum this year is creating space, and whether that's creating space within community or online or within a political space, it's all there's a whole range of different conversations and dialogues that we'll be having or hoping to create in relation to all sorts of activities around artists with disability creating space, whether for themselves or their artworks, or for audiences.
Yeah, of course. Just as a side note, first of all, I could just the birds in the background of your recordings are quite delightful, and also I've just read that you're engaging a lot in like landscape photography, which
yeah, well, that's my
seems like you've really found a way to make this work for you.
Yeah, well, it's a hobby, semi professional type activity, but yeah, so living in the country and surrounded by fields and lots of birds. On every Zoom call, someone comments about the bird calls.
Well, I'm glad I could fulfill that cliche at least, just for a sense of continuity.
Sadly, I can't tell you what any of those birds are, but
that's your next next
yes.
goal, I think, of course. So, I mean, also, if you're just living in, Maragong, which I guess is that near Robertson? Is that?
It is indeed, yes. So
Yeah.
at the top of the Quarry Pass.
So even that probably just changes your accessibility to program this work and also to engage in it. Like ultimately, that sort of changes travel for you.
Well, it does, but I mean, I've only been in this role 6 weeks, and the organisation has always operated on a very decentralised and virtual model. So we really don't have a physical office at all. Where my team is distributed throughout the country in Perth and Brisbane and Tasmania, and I have a board that's all around the country. So in that set, we have really always operated on a sort of distributed virtual model. So in a sense, the Meeting Place Challenge is just the next step or phase of that operating model.
Yeah, of course.
In fact, in a sense, it's probably easy to organise as an online forum on a distributed organisational model than it is to try and organise a conference in a physical place of Canberra or Melbourne or Brisbane.
Which I'm sure will create its own set of new problems that you
Yes,
can
it
then
does.
engage.
It does, particularly in terms of accessibility with ensuring audio captioning or Auslan interpretation or any number of things that are or audio description on any number of things that are really necessary to ensure that you've got a universally accessible program.
Of course, yeah, universal access is the goal there, isn't it?
Indeed.
Well then, Ethan and Christian, maybe I can ask sort of you what this, as far as the Strange Ways Ensemble go, like you were always pretty dependent on the physical space of coming together regularly and sort of hanging out and making work and devising work. And it sounds like you've had to suddenly transition to regular online meetings and online creating work. What's that been like? How's the change of thinking work for you?
Well, personally, because I'm on the internet a lot, I didn't have too much trouble, using the app, even though it was my first time ever using it. But one advantage of it was the access we had to the internet. Like, I could just switch over to my internet exploring, whether I was going to say app, but Google Chrome, Edge, whatever, and just look up whatever I needed to. So yeah, having the internet with an easy access was a definite bonus.
Yeah, and obviously you miss the personals, like we all kind of really miss being in that collaborative kind of space. But have you found that? Yeah. I mean, it's good to see you two together on the same screen. That alone makes me feel like that someone's getting more. So what are your goals for this sort of time? Like, are you going to be looking at making more work? Like, how are you processing this at the moment?
We are still making work. I mean, we've switched from online to being in the same space now, but we
we're back in our normal physical space, and we've started workshopping some stuff.
I'm a bit jealous. That's great, because you two only finished like Trash Talk. Your show was on the start of this year, so are you devising a new work already?
We're really trying to figure out what exactly we're trying to do. It's more finding the concept, really, rather than working on anything solid. So
yeah, I just even thinking about Strange Ways and Trash Talk, really, everything I could see about Trash Talk was about justice in the workplace. So I mean, it seems like I feel like you would have that conversation on a day-to-day basis anyway. So what makes you sort of engage in these discussions creatively as well? Or I guess what I mean is, like, you're making work about people with disability and sort of issues around it. What does that allow you to do?
Well, I think what we look at is look at more of what we can do, not just because of who we are, but because of what we can do. And I mean, a lot of us there's about 5 members out of Strange Ways who work in an Australian Disability Enterprise outside of the group. So, and we wanted to show how much we enjoy our job.
Yeah, of course. Well, I can't wait to see what comes next for it, I suppose. That sounds great. Well, then maybe, Sophia, even like your work, as far as I've been reading up on it, there's a real, I mean, not even just your work, I mean, the work as a whole, people are telling more stories. Like, it's becoming more prevalent in the stories as well. And even like your work, as far as I could see, like comparing to your sorry, what I'm saying is in some of your early films, I've seen interviews where you have said there was like a haunted swimming pool, for instance, and someone else saw the metaphor of like that evoked a lot of living with a disability. But then obviously works like Gimpsy explored in a much more direct, less metaphorical way. Is that reflected in the art scene as a whole for you?
Well, I mean, I started making films more than 15 years ago. I made films when films were made on film.
The
And
classics.
that's a long time ago. I'm not a dinosaur, by the way. I have kept up with digital advances. But I think when I started out, in order to be an artist, and if you had a disability, it was the measure of success was how well could you hide your disability and how well could you perform in spite of your disability. So the people, I found myself often rewarded when my voice sounded great on stage, or I was creating work that didn't necessarily have disability in content. So, I mean, I was really adamant that I wanted to have a career in screen production, that I wanted to be making films. And I and for me, it was very much about being the same as my peers, who were other filmmakers who were able-bodied, who were creating stories about contemporary culture. So I was doing the same. But what I've noticed over the last 5 years, there's been a real paradigm shift in terms of how creatives with disability now see themselves and how they position themselves in the bigger culture. And over the last 10, 15 years, I firmly believe now that creatives with disability have such a unique perspective on the world, and even if you don't make something that has disability content, you are still going to express how you see the world through what you make.
Of course, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, and I think audiences love it because for them, it's an insight into another way of living that's not same. But and you know, often people with disability create extraordinary work, and people who, you know, some of the stars of our past, like Prince and many people like him, they had invisible disability, but that contributed to the brilliance of their output. So, you know, you kind of, I think we have so much to offer that hasn't been even plumbed in terms of what we can offer to contemporary culture. And I think programmers, curators, and, you know, funding people are now starting to recognize that there's not a lesser voice, but a different and quite unique perspective. And so that's been the paradigm shift for me now, that there's another way of looking at the world that is just as valuable as what the mainstream may offer.
Yeah, it seems like on a very kind of broad term, like the way I used to understand art and reading and all that kind of stuff was essentially that I was actually learning to empathize with someone who wasn't me. Essentially, was the simplest way to sort of think about it, and you actually learn through living someone else's experience. And then as time went on, it was just like I actually didn't just want to know what it's like to be them, but I also wanted to just not have art from the same people, really. Like that is really what it is. I don't want that. I think you're right in that now there's this shift towards we actually want to see art about these new identities that have had to have been hidden recently, up until recently, I suppose. That even as you said with funding, like there's actually a funding push towards making work like by with people with disability, I suppose, and not to mention people of color and everything else. It's like we actually actively are trying to veer away from the same. So yeah.
Generally, with agencies, they're seeking to ensure that there's diverse representation. So it is very much in the front of people's mind, especially here in Australia, that diverse representation is actually underway. It's actually supported. So it becomes part of the criteria in terms of assessing projects when they come in for funding.
Which is your job partly, isn't it?
Yeah, I work for Screen New South Wales at Create New South Wales. So I work in the screen team with 3 other colleagues, and we assess projects that come in for development and for production finance across the range of platforms, from web series, virtual reality, feature film, drama and documentary, and television series. So we seek to make sure we have a diverse representation of creatives and stories in all of the projects that we fund. And disability is definitely one of, part of that diversity remit.
Sure, and you're also running Screenability program for Sydney Film Festival, and which, I can give a spiel about it in the podcast voiceover when this sort of goes out as well. But essentially, you budget for creatives to premiere films at the Sydney Film Festival.
No, what that is, it's an initiative targeted at filmmakers with disability who have demonstrated a desire and some experience in creating a career in screen production. So basically, it's a scheme where we give 3 teams $30,000 each to make a short film. And the only criteria is that one of the 3 creatives, the producer, the director, or the writer, have to identify as being having disability. So, but they also need to demonstrate an actual desire and network to be part of the industry. So it's not really about funding anybody who just wants to have a go. It's actually funding, seeking out and supporting and escalating the career of people who want to make film, want to be, creating content. The content itself doesn't necessarily have to have disability content, but to date they all have had. We've funded it for 3 years now, and we've got 9 films, and they've all premiered at the Sydney Film Festival. So we'll be announcing the next round early September, if not before, for 2021.
Sure. Just one thing. Kylie, I noticed. So Kylie, you're translating my words for Sophia, but not translating Sophia's. I guess I'm wondering what. There's an interesting dynamic of what Auslan interpreting is for Zoom and who that's sort of for, especially for like this. I was wondering maybe if I asked Sophia a question, you could also translate Sophia's response as well. If you're up for that.
I think it depends on if you're planning to air the Zoom publicly, then yes, she should interpret for me as well.
Yeah, so I feel like if we're talking about accessibility to the arts, maybe there is, and we should include this video as far so that people, because I realize how limiting it is just having a podcast as well. Like a podcast as well is a purely oral medium. It's maybe we should be incorporating that. So maybe, Kylie, would you mind also translating Sophia's words for everyone else as well?
Sure, I've got no issue doing that. The only issue is I'm on my own. So normally we would have 2 of us for this, but I'm happy to do it. That's fantastic. If you wouldn't mind doing that, so then we can actually sort of show this and make this fully accessible.
You might also have to have some audio description of each of us before the event. Then
yes, of course.
Picture each of the participants.
See, I think this is it's not so much just having the conversation; it's also the fact that me getting this wrong happily and coming to terms with it is probably part of the discussion ultimately. It's this idea of solving one problem just sort of creates more, which I guess is what we were saying sort of before, Matthew. We're sort of learning to exist in a new space, which then it creates more problems that sort of can solve. Even with Meeting Place, I was just reading that you're also showcasing creative works and artistic works as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so this.
Part of the program will be hopefully another virtual tour with the National Portrait Gallery as part of their existing series of virtual tours of their collection, and it will be a virtual tour of the artworks within their collection by artists with disability. And we launched yesterday, or put out a call yesterday we're launching our inaugural online magazine. So we've put out a call to writers with disability or who are deaf to contribute pieces to that for publication, whether it's poetry or flash fiction or short stories or non-fiction. So there's a number of ways in which, and then in the evenings the program will be showcasing. It might be film, or it might be music, or some other sort of cultural event.
Sure. So maybe if it sounds like if we're all working, like if we're all in different sort of art forms between film and like theatre and performance and poetry and all that kind of stuff, obviously it's not so much a simple change that we're looking for. We're looking for, like, obviously a greater systematic change. So maybe I could ask, are there any steps that, first of all, artists can make to make their work more accessible, like in a very sort of short-term way that could be long-term? And then I guess the real problem is also dealing with arts companies on upholding that change.
I mean, just to take the second part of your question first about arts companies, I think what is really, yes, there have been some really significant and important changes, but we are still faced with an environment where artists with disability find it more difficult to find work. They're going to stay unemployed or be unemployed longer than their peers without disability, but about like sort of a third as opposed to a quarter. When they find work, they're going to be paid 42% less than their peers. And they're going into a marketplace where 60% of arts and cultural organisations that we surveyed did not employ or did not know if they employed a person with disability, and only less than 40% of those organisations had a disability action plan. So there's some real lots and lots of work to be done in terms of people understanding the barriers and the real life effects of a inequitable employment market and skewed funding arrangements, and organisations not seriously directing their attention to increasing their accessibility and inclusiveness of persons with disability, whether they're artists that they're working with or audiences that they're trying to connect with.
Yeah, I think it's that thing of you can provide a program and a funding situation for that to solve something in the short term. But you're right, it's like ongoing employment and ongoing funding, and also what Sophie was saying before about like the inherent idea that you're competing with peers that have different life experience.
And I think the other thing I think to note, yes, there's certainly funding that's available, but when you look at the statistics, there's something like 18% of the population, or about 4.5 or just under 4.5 million people, are Australians with disability. But only 4% of artists who were involved in projects that received funding from at the Commonwealth level through the then Department of Communication and the Arts, only 4% of those people identified as having a disability. So there's a bit of a disconnect between why is not the level of applications at least reflective of the percentage of the population, and then only 7% of applications for the Australia Council's core programs were given to only 7% of those that received funding were given to people who were identifying as having a disability. And so I think there's a real need for some structural change, as well as organisations and participants, but some real structural change around how we look at and assess grant funding for the arts, because is an artist, when you're looking at funding programs and there's a panel assessment, but there is no one on that panel who is an artist with disability or any lived experience of disability, how is that panel able to make any objective assessment of the value of that application in a competitive environment against other applications where they have a greater experience or affinity with. And so I think, that we need to show some leadership ourselves and seek to provide leadership to ensure that there are more people with disability on peer assessment panels.
Which I guess is where someone like Sophia is really, like, Sophia, you're like leading the charge on this. Great work to have somehow infiltrated this. Like, that's a huge step to even, I don't know, to have broken through that barrier in the first place. And on top, I mean, I guess really what I've got here is just like this room is all the people that are fighting for change. It's quite uplifting in that sort of sense. And that's just not only for access for funding, but also like for artists who even to enter into the industry to then get funding. Like there's so many steps that have to be breached before there's even any sense of equality, surely.
I think Matthew's right in that in terms of in a colloquial way, the gatekeepers of funding. When they are represented with peers who have a disability or funding executives who have disability, then there's a much more welcoming sense that artists with disability will be seen on a merit basis as well as taking into account whole of career, so to speak.
Yes.
Because whole of career is that artists with disability will not have the same opportunity as able-bodied artists. So you kind of have to consider where have they come from, where are they at, and you do tailor the assessment accordingly. And to do that, you do need an understanding of the disability art landscape. You do need an understanding and an overview of the artists who are currently practicing, as well as, their peers in a bigger mainstream sense. At Create New South Wales, we do take that very seriously. When we get artists with disability who may come into a general stream, then they will be assessed by a peer with disability. Our board have artists with disability represented on them. And of course, I'm a filmmaker with disability, so I contribute to the Screen New South Wales space. And in Australia Council for the Art, we also have that peer assessment process where artists with disability are employed to make those assessments. I mean, I can only speak for the small sphere that I'm in on this side of the country.
Yeah.
So I can't speak for agencies in other states. But I think there is growing awareness of lack of representation in those decision-making spaces. And I think many people are, especially in government, are looking to how they can make changes that are, going to create
tangible and have a long-term effect. Yeah. Well, that's all sort of behind the scenes and the kind of funding. Maybe we should turn to the actual artists then. So like Ethan and Christian, like for the two of you making work, like a lot of that is by being like you two are the representatives, I suppose, for anyone else who's looking to sort of make work. Isn't your role? There must be some responsibility of you two going like, yes, we are the ones who are making work. We're the ones who are trying to reach those audiences. What's it like? Like, I guess my question is, why is Strange Ways Ensemble important for you? Like, as making work and sort of doing it.
Well, would you like to go first?
No, it's okay. You can.
So polite. You can fight it out if you'd like.
Well, first of all, I should say that with Strange Ways, you don't just see us as people coming together just to make theatre. I kind of see us as a bit of a family. Those who understand what you go through because they've been through that, like how your days are because they probably have the same days themselves. And plus it's a big opportunity, which very proud to have.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it actually really does reflect exactly what Sophia and Matthew were sort of saying of like, it's really about having that conversation and sort of surrounding yourself with peers and making sure that your work is represented, I suppose. So I guess I'm not.
Yeah, and I just thought it was the most exciting show, fabulous, with all of the screens you had on stage, and the actual story itself was so evocative of the struggles that people with disability face in general employment. I thought it was fabulous. I thought you guys were fabulous, actually. So I'm really looking forward to the next show when you can get that up, when you can get an audience back in the room.
Was that trash talk you were saying, Sophia?
Yeah, I came down to Wollongong to see it.
Sweet. And then, so Ethan and Christian, Trash Talk then toured to Parramatta, didn't it?
Oh, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Oh.
I think it was fabulous. I brought my partner as well, and we just had a ball that night. And it's fresh and it's different, and it's a different voice. And sometimes, it's great to go and see Sydney Theatre Company and see all the bells and whistles, and that has a place that's very entrenched and fun to go to. But the voice that Maragong has is I think it's on par. It's different, but it's on par with representing our culture back to us.
Yeah. Well then, Christian and Ethan. So how do you how much do you deal with Maragong? Like yourselves, like you just making the work. Like, what can you speak about Maragong as a company?
I think it's a great company. I love the shows that they put on all over the years. It's pretty interesting. I can't. There's a word, but it's not coming to mind at this moment.
No, that's fine. That happens to me all the time. So then what about like even touring your work, like showing your did showing your work in different spaces, which I guess is so that more people can see it and to make it more accessible as well. Did that change the way that you thought about the work? Like ultimately, you're not just performing a work in one space for one group of people, I suppose. Did the work change for you?
Well, compared to the Bruce Gordon at the Illawarra Performing Arts Centre, it's more the traditional theatrical space where the audience and the stage is somewhat separate. But when compared to the theatre where we performed it in Parramatta, it's basically tiered seating, but the lowest seating is on the same level as the stage. So you've got that closer connection with the audience, and that just heightens the wrestling aspect of the show.
Of course, that sounds very intense. That sounds great. I guess that's what we're aiming for, right? We're aiming for that very direct connection, so that these stories can have a very immediate and a very direct connection with our audience, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such an important role for theatre companies who are well versed in creating work with creatives with disability, because I think it takes time to build that understanding of how to best support a creative with disability, what kind of measures need to take place for them to produce their best work. I'm thinking back to 2017 when Imagine Touch toured to Sydney Festival, which was a show about two deaf-blind women who presented a show about what it was like to actually be in their world. And they did that with director Jodie Mundy, who comes from a deaf family. And but that couldn't have happened without a very particular way of supporting these two creatives in producing what ultimately ended up being a fantastic work of art. So, I think when you think about how we can best support creatives with disability, it's also about what structure we can support. So sometimes it's about supporting theatre companies to learn how to work with creatives with disability and how to escalate, their careers as well.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, does Arts Access Australia does that work with in that kind of sense of working with artists and creatives in that, or are you more looking at the companies and their involvement?
We we see ourselves as providing a role or a role of leadership and advocacy, sort of at a national level, in terms of advocating for change and arguing for what should happen, and for seeking to improve I suppose, the ecosystem or the environment within which everyone operates. We have, as part of the members of our organisation, is each of the state or territory peak bodies in disability in the arts in every state and territory, except for Tasmania, who doesn't have one, but they're supported, I think, through Victoria. So it's those state-based organisations that are more directly involved with either individual artists or companies in terms of either providing advice or assistance or opportunities to identify ways to connect or to educate or inform at that sort of more grassroots level, whereas we focus more on sort of policy and lobbying and advocating. But one of the things I did want to raise in terms of creating or improving things or creating change, I think also it's one of the real important things is in terms of ensuring that there's a real recognition that it's important. I mean, in the current environment, I think we've seen that the response of the Commonwealth government would make some people think that the arts and cultural industries are not important, or at least the government doesn't think so. And that then permeates throughout the rest of the community. And so that when you're trying to highlight something, if there's a general sense of, well, that's not seen as something that's necessarily important, it becomes much more difficult. For artists with disability, it's compounded even more, because not only is the art sector seen as not important, but many artists with disability feel that they've been left behind or neglected by the government's response because of the way in which COVID has affected their income, and yet they are not eligible to receive any other form of income support, and haven't therefore benefited from the temporary uplift in that government support in terms of jobs. So, they don't qualify for JobSeeker. We undertook a survey of our membership in May, and almost 60% of those surveyed had lost income of about $3,500 a month. And 47% of those were not eligible for JobKeeper. And one of the respondents actually said that the way in which the government had tailored its response in relation such that many artists were not able to get JobSeeker and the uplift was just a signal to the rest of Australia that we don't matter. That was the quote. And I think that is a real concern if, as we try to move for change, there's a general sense that, well, it's not really important because of it's not seen as something that's valuable to do, which I think is incredibly harmful and incredibly not short-sighted or blatantly wrong, but
which you're right is then compounded by the level of like artists with disability working.
Yes, that's right. I mean, yes. So not only do they receive less than their peers now because of COVID and the way in which there's been a response to COVID for support, that they're receiving even less because they've lost significant income of a very small income to start with.
Yeah, of course. Well, then, so what do you reckon? What do you all think that the steps then? Oh, by the way, Kylie, are you up? Do we need to give you a break? Because you're working so hard, by the way. You're doing very well.
Yeah, so I've just sent a message to the agency to see if we can get someone else on, just to swap.
Sure. Do we need to have a break? Is that the plan? Annie, what do you? Sorry, everyone. I didn't mean to. We had a good flow going.
Sorry, I do believe we need to give Kylie a break. We're actually late for her break. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Right.
I'm going to take a break and sort it out because, I took this on thinking I wasn't going to have to interpret for Sophia because usually I don't. But that's fine. I'm happy to take a 5-minute break if that suits everybody.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then it looks like I've got somebody who can join me, which means we can just keep going on after that.
What time do we finish though?
3:15.
3:15.
3:15. Okay, great.
Okay, I'll have a quick break now and I'll jump back on.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kylie.
Thanks.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm sorry to disrupt the flow, but I was just making sure we know what's happening sort of here. Just to sort of backtrack what was happening there. I guess I'm wondering, what do we need to do as far as is the first step in the short term then, is it are we looking to change how artists work, how audiences perceive work, or how companies work? I guess is the kind of the question that's sort of hovering back here. There's obviously the issues throughout the whole thing, and I guess we all need to work in different ways. So maybe I could start off with as far as Ethan and Christian, working with audiences. It sounds like your work, even as Sophia was saying, your work is just as important and just as good and just as exciting. When it comes to working with what are some audience responses you've had with your work? Do you speak to your audiences as much?
There have been some people that would come to us after a show, maybe days later. I do have friends who come and see the show and just say, how they loved it. I haven't really had much people who come and say, how do you do this? What's it like? But I think don't know if this is relevant. One of the guys from Strange Ways, Phil, he came to me after one show and he said that someone who came to the show said they never heard of an ADE. So the fact that we now what it's like, it's interesting because people
are learning as they're your role is actually just to educate audiences, really.
Yeah.
Which is a huge responsibility as an actor and a creator as well, don't you think?
Yeah. I do see it as entertaining, but as trying to entertain an audience, but you do get to learn a few things as the show goes on.
Yeah, of course. So if that's what it takes to get, it sounds like you're doing all the right things to get our audience's attention. It sounds like the work that you create obviously has the impact and is doing what you're setting out to achieve. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is, first of all, you are immediately much more successful than I am as far as an artist goes, because that's so good work on feeling that kind of satisfaction on there. So after that, the audience, then the next layer of that is getting accessibility for artists. Then, so maybe that's Sophia. That seems to be much more in your court. What are some steps we need to take to get artists more empowered and accessible to being involved, whether that's funding or getting into the industry?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question again?
Maybe, is it because, should I be waiting for Kylie to come back?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sure. So then, so maybe I can pivot to Matthew then. So if you're the one who seems to be dealing with the kind of the greater, the much bigger picture stuff.
Macro, yeah.
Yeah. What's the kind of, is there a next tangible step for you?
There's probably a few. I mean, there's everything seems to be so interconnected, and in terms of certainly artists, I think there's real scope to improve the level of or the number of organisations that have effective and meaningful disability action plans in terms of their engagement with artists with disability. And I mean, I don't think there's any lack of understanding in the sector amongst quote unquote mainstream organisations as to the benefit that they would generate and the amazing output that could be produced by involving artists with disability in their program, but I don't think they necessarily are aware of everything that has to be put in place to make it a success for that to happen. And I think that if there's some greater focus on organisations and their disability action plans, I think that would be a huge, tremendous first step.
So you're saying, because obviously you're saying so companies understand the inherent value and they're like, yeah, we know.
But also but then, I mean, as and I don't mean to be critical, but as we've learned,
feel free, by the way.
no, but as we've learned in the process of this afternoon, you were very, certain to ensure that you had an Auslan interpreter for Sophia, but then when you thought, okay, but then we could make the whole thing, the video available, which and if it was fully Auslan interpreted, that would be great for deaf people. But then that raises an issue of, that's not great for people who have a vision disability.
Exactly, yeah.
So it compounds, and so that very simple thing, people need to think more carefully and closely about it as to what does that mean that we have to do, or not so much on the artist involvement side of things, but in terms of engaging with audiences with disabilities. I mean, there's lots of things I think that can happen with that. There's issues around what the NDIS funds in relation to sort of arts and cultural programs, but even things like organisations. If someone who with a disability who requires a carer wants to go and see something or participate in an activity, they've got to buy 2 tickets. They can't buy 1 ticket because they can't go by themselves.
Yeah.
And then they go, well, but how can they afford? Is it fair that they should have to buy 2 tickets for their own experience when the person who is accompanying them is not there to see the show or participate, but there because of the needs of the ticket holder? So there's, but I also understand that person would then take a paying ticket of someone who would. So there's lots of things to be thought about, but they are things that I don't think people do think about.
Yeah, no.
And very simple things like a second ticket or the cost of a second ticket.
Yeah, and even then, that's also kind of creative thinking as well. It's just like that's even in the shows that I've been involved with, once we make sure we have like a soft performance and an Auslan interpreted performance, and like once you do it, it actually is, even the process of doing it is so much more rewarding, and and especially once you can reach those audiences and things like that. I suppose that's again compounded once you get to the sort of artistic company levels. So
go back to Matthew's comment about the disability action plan. It is probably the first step of anybody who will consider working with creative or audiences with disability, because what it actually does, it's an audit. It's an audit of the actual company's capacity to provide service, whether internal or external. So and it's only by doing that, then a company realizes what is it that we are offering, how accessible is it, and who are our audiences. So that, I mean, as you've just discovered with the interpreter and with this and that, it's a very common mistake. It usually pops up on the very first time or second time you might engage a interpreter. And it is about, and Accessible Art, actually, the New South Wales agency, they actually provide a workshop called Accessorize, which is working with companies, how do they actually provide access on, outward facing and in facing to the company. So, yeah, I mean, that is the very first step, a disability action plan, because they're not all the same. They're actually tailored toward the company or the organisation or the artist with disability.
They also seem like very important. Oh, these seemed like very important mistakes to make. Like, I can imagine the idea of being worried about this being incredibly stressful, but by doing it, it's actually like the problems can be solved. Like, really, just with like, I think I'm happier to try and make the mistake than I am to not try at all.
Depends on how you want to fall on your face.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very happy to look stupid sometimes, I think. It's just, if that makes any sense.
Look, I think, as always, it is best to try because to be shut out because, it is always good to try. But,
and you don't have to try on your own also. I mean,
yeah, of course. And also a disability action plan would do that.
Yeah, because I mean the whole thing about disability action plans is that they're there to help you, to make your life easy as well. Because I think it's just about having knowledge, and knowledge just avoid problems before they even start. But again, you have to experience working with audiences with disability. You have to experience working with creative, and then you start to fully understand. It's not as hard as you think.
No, yeah. I think it's just knowing how much I work, like so much of my work is based on sound, I suppose, and not so much any sort of other thing. So it's just, I'm just suddenly becoming very aware of how much, how easy it is for me to change and adapt, really. Like, it doesn't take much apart from doing, A, more research, and B, trying it out and asking questions, I suppose. So maybe then, Sophia, if I go back to you, if we were talking about the links between with the like an artist reaching the audience versus someone like Arts Access Australia reaching the arts companies, it seems like it's your responsibility to access the artists and to incorporate artists in the industry more. Is that a bit of a vague question? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm just trying to work out. Is it the chicken or the egg question?
I think it is.
Maybe just rephrase it.
I guess what I mean is, like, of the people in this kind of room, you're the one who deals most directly with artists, and so maybe
sector.
Yeah. So
artists with and you're asking whose responsibility is it?
Or maybe just like, what's a tangible step artists can make next then? Whether that be in working in film or like, what should their short-term goals be to then be long-term?
It always comes down to keep yourself informed, and that can happen at a grassroots level and at a highly experienced level. That is the number one step that all artists should take. So you keep yourself informed to the fullest of your extent, and that means having access to social channels, to all kinds of public-facing media that arts organisations may put out. It's about connecting with people. I think it's always about connecting with the immediate network you have around you, how you can actually leverage that into another connection or an actual conversation with an agency if you want to make an application for fund. I think there's always a sense of personal responsibility in terms of you do need to initiate that connection to get whatever it is that you need. And Matthew is right. I mean, I work in a government sphere, so we're not, we can influence and we can pull levers that work in the outside private world and, in smaller and bigger organisations. But as a government agency, we have a very distinct, we have a distinct sense of we represent those underrepresented people, and we do our best to ensure that they have a voice and access to support and fund. And that's not necessarily reflected in the private space or in bigger mainstream organisations. But we do have those levers and we can pull them where we can. But I mean, I think it is. I have a certain kind of pragmatism in that myself as an artist, when I've met with the front door, a door that's been shut in my face repeatedly, I kind of think, well, where can I go? Where else can I go? Is there another crack I can come in through? Can I turn myself into jelly and just squeeze myself under the door?
I believe you can.
I mean, most people do that. I don't have that superpower. But what I'm trying to get is that if you are serious about having a career, don't take no for an answer, but do find a job that actually pays the bills. And that is true for probably 90% of artists in Australia. And just keep, I mean, some art forms you can do on your own. Other art forms, you need a team. And as such, I think you have to calibrate, you know, the expectation. If I need a team of people to realise my work, who do I know that can help me? Who do I know? Can I work with someone who's more experienced than I am? I often say to people, you don't have to have a team full of disability creative. You can be the only disabled person within that team. And sometimes doing that will take you to the next step where you need to go. In other instances, working within a creative team of disabled people is where you need to be, or where you will do your best work. I think always be prepared to think outside the box, and that is one of the biggest strengths people with disability have. They are forced to think outside of the box every single day, and they can apply that to the work as well. So, you know, I'm really optimistic about the level of artwork that people are producing these days. I'm just seeing the work getting better and better, more sophisticated. People are accessing bigger support funds. So, you know, I think people are becoming increasingly sophisticated about how they approach funding agencies and how they gain support and how they infiltrate and corrupt mainstream companies, so to speak.
Yeah. Even that's so... It's all. I mean, it's also about like making work, like expanding your actual work palette as well, isn't it? Ethan and Christian, like, so Ethan, you were doing like the poetry and the poetry reading. That seemed to be a thing that you were doing on the side that you weren't anticipating to be involved in. Strange. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So do you both do? Do you both do separate like artworks in your own, like as I don't know, personal explorations as well?
Yeah, personally, I've been more recently thinking of getting more into screenwriting because I did a little bit of that when I went to uni. So I haven't gone around to it yet, but I plan to do that shortly. Also, while during the pandemic, I've been getting back into guitar practice, I guess, try and build up my skills, essentially.
Yeah, of course. It feels like it's supposed to be a good time to sort of create new skills, but it seems just as stressful as always.
I kind of have the same interest with screenwriting. In fact, I just do it. I've never really learned, so I don't know how it's. I kind of just heard advice of other people, but you don't really know how to exactly write it down. I did kind of been doing that a fair bit. I even been interested in writing plays. Just ideas I want to workshop and put on stage, but see other people do. Not just our group, but see other groups as well.
Yeah, of course. It sounds like Sophia and you have a lot, like both of you have a lot to talk about as far as developing your screenwriting and making that work happen.
Yeah, I should probably also admit that I do photography. I mean, haven't done it the last. Haven't been able to do it because of COVID, but once the restrictions kind of limited, I brought my camera out and try to find the first thing to take. And the only thing I've posted so far was a group of galahs.
Well, I hear the birds out in Maragong are pretty good at being photographed as well.
And there's lots of galahs here. Present company included, I think. And Tom, in a blatant commercial plug, I would say that the first best thing that someone could do would be to buy a ticket to Meeting Place 2020, which should be next week. I think that we will go on. They'll be available.
Fantastic. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes when we post this, that we have that, of course, to all your work, because actually, you've all got a presence that are able to be found. So I'll definitely get on that. I think we're coming sort of to a close on that, and also I'm very aware that now Kylie is translating for 5 people, which is very impressive to watch, if nothing else. So I know that it's so hard to have that balance between the artists, the artists talking about audience, just the levels of things here. It sort of makes it quite exciting. And I actually really enjoyed this chat. So thanks so much for doing that and engaging on the level that you did.
No, thank you.
Is there anything that anyone would like to sort of bring up or finish off? Or
just on accessibility, if you're going to post the Vimeo link or the Zoom link, you will need to subtitle it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, some of it's not captioned, and you will need to advertise that as well. So
yes,
I think most deaf will accept subtitles. But if you advertise it as fully Auslan interpreted, then you might get a bit of a mismatch of expectations.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. That is good to take note of.
You've opened a can of worms, Tom. By
I love it though.
Be helpful.
No, I think this is really good though, right? So that's where we left off. It really doesn't take that much work to make podcasts accessible. It just requires slightly more preparation, some clear communication, and thinking things through a bit. I'm really happy I was able to talk through this with everyone. And obviously, a massive thank you to all our guests, Ethan, Christian, Sophia, and Matthew, for being patient with me, because I'm sure they've had to deal with this unpreparedness throughout all their work and lives already. So, well, anyway, I'll keep trying. I'll put links to the Strange Ways Ensemble and to Sophia Golan's work and to Meeting Place in the show notes. I'm pretty ashamed I couldn't get this together before Meeting Place happened, but nothing has been easy. So definitely sign up to Meeting Place's newsletter, and I'll link to the Arts Access Australia YouTube page so you can view the videos as they come online. And a huge thanks to Kylie Clear from Sweeney Interpreting for working her butt off for this episode. Check out the video of this conversation in the show notes as well. This was also the final episode of this season of Creative Dialogues. Don't worry, there will be more, because I had fun and I learned a lot, and we've been receiving some great feedback. So if you want to get in touch, visit the Creative Dialogues webpage on the Wollongong City Council website for more information. I'll also put it in the show notes. And a huge thanks to Annie Clapton and Janine Primer throughout this series, who did all the heavy lifting for every episode. I'm Tom Hogan, and well, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
See you guys. See you, everyone.
See ya. Bye.